CVSS scoring is primarily designed for software, hardware, firmware type risk assessments, right? However, like I said, you can tweak it a little bit, right? And you can adjudicate other factors. But in the interest of time, we're just going to go kind of with straight how the calculator works. So you can walk away, and if you want to try it on your own, in your own organization, you have an understanding of how to do it. So basically, the CVSS scoring is it's comprised of 3 metric groups: a base group, a temporal group, and an environmental group. You're going to get a score on a single thing, right? And with the CVSS scoring, what they're doing is they're adjudicating what we call CVEs, or common vulnerability. Oh my gosh, I forgot the E. It'll come to me. We're a single CVE for a particular piece of software, right? And what you need to do is you need to get a base score first. What is the base score, the base vulnerability score for this vulnerability that has been identified? And then you lay on top of that your next scoring group, right? So you'll start with one scoring group, which is your base group. You'll lay the next scoring group on top of it, which will give you a different base score, and then you'll lay your last scoring group on top of that, and it'll give you your final score, right? Now, the calculator does make some assumptions, and the core assumption that it makes is that it assumes that the reasonable worst case impact is true, okay? So it's only going to deal with this is the worst, this is the worst case of this being exploited. So I have an example for you, which kind of makes all of this make a little more sense. So we'll walk through it quickly. Hopefully you understand. So I just picked a CVE at random, right? And this one just happened to be Adobe Acrobat buffer overflow vulnerability. It was identified in 2009. That's how you can tell by the CVE number, CVE 2009-0658. All the CVE numbers move incrementally, and they switch over at the year boundary. So this was the 658th vulnerability identified in 2009, right? So that's what that number means. So the base vulnerability was that Adobe Acrobat and Reader version 9.0 and earlier are vulnerable to buffer overflow caused by improper bounds checking when parsing a malformed JPEG-2 image stream embedded within a PDF document. The attack is that the vulnerability can be exploited by convincing a victim to open a malicious document on a system that uses a vulnerable version of Adobe Acrobat or Adobe Reader. So send them a PDF with this malformed JPEG-2 image. Now I have set the conditions for the buffer overflow. Okay, that's essentially all that means. So first thing I do is I get my base CVSS score, and it looks something like this, right? And what you see highlighted in green are what the CVSS base starts with. So what is the attack vector? It's a local attack. It's going to cause a buffer overflow on a single machine. What is the attack complexity? It's a fairly low complexity. Anyone can embed an image into a PDF. Are there any privileges required? No. All it requires is for someone to just open it on a system. Is user interaction required? Yes, I got to get them to open this PDF. What is the scope? In other words, do you have to change levels of privilege within the system architecture? And this one happened. It was unchanged, right? Confidentiality, what is the attack, right? So it's an attack on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, all adjudicated as high. Okay, great. So this is my base score. You see my base score is 7.8. It's a 10-point scale. So this is probably something that I want to make sure I've patched my Adobe readers or my Adobe pros out there, because that's a pretty high vulnerability. However, now I need to lay my temporal score on top of that. So what is my temporal score? My temporal score basically is it real? Is this a real issue that we have to deal with? And you see, and the ones in green are the ones that I selected. These are selectable by you. So what is the exploit code maturity? You see I have options here: unproven, proof of concept, functional, and high. All those mean are this vulnerability, like for instance, unproven. This vulnerability exists, we know it exists. However, we have not been able to recreate it in laboratory settings. Versus proof of concept. The vulnerability exists, we know it exists, and we're able to recreate it in laboratory conditions, but we're not seeing it in the wild. Functional. We're able to recreate it in laboratory conditions, and we are seeing it exploited in the wild. And then high, we are seeing it exploited in the wild, and it is being exploited at a high rate. How hard is it to fix? Well, there's an official fix for it. In other words, they have a patch for it. Or they may not have a patch for it, but the vendor has sent out either workaround information or temporary fix information, like disabling the ability to open a PDF with embedded JPEG or whatever. Or is it a 0-day? Is there no remediation available for it at all? And then report confidence, unknown, reasonable, confirmed. Well, again, depending on what you selected ahead of it, well, it kind of will force you into what to select there. So you see, once I lay my temporal score on top of it, it brought my score down to a 7.2, right? Based on the selections that I made. If I would have made different selections, the score would have gone up or down, depending. But now you see I went from a 7.8 to a 7.2. So I'm getting better. It's bringing the risk down. So lastly, I laid my environmental score on top of it. What is my environment? So my environment, based on how my environment works, remember the base scoring was assuming that I had a requirement in my organization for confidentiality, integrity, and availability to all be high. Well, maybe I want or have, assigned within my organization that my confidentiality, integrity, and availability are actually only adjudicated at medium, right? So I want all of them at medium. Since the attack vector required it to be local, well, okay, so now we know, right? I mean, I have ways to limit the danger if I can change it from, okay, needing local access to maybe you need physical access to the machine to actually exploit it, right? And then you kind of see the, kind of the rest of them and how they move, right? Generally, how you select one will kind of dictate how you're gonna select others. But you see with what I selected here, based on my own environment, it brought my overall score, my adjudicated risk for this particular vulnerability down to a 6.8. So now it's at a moderate, right? So I went from a high risk vulnerability to a moderate risk vulnerability just by applying logic and adjudicating based on my environment and not just what some website or some machine told me was true, right? So that is the CVSS scoring. That's how it's used. If you're looking for a way to actually get a good grounded score and what your perceived risk is versus what your actual risk is,